it's time for me to review Wicked. Yeah! Or should I say, oh, ah. That's not like a proper bell that I could do. That's just a fun for jokes one, okay? The director is John M. Chu. They spent 145 million US dollars and they made 654.8 million. Just to give a quick disclaimer before I even start this, I have to be honest, I haven't really watched any of like the previous films, so like The Wiz, The Wizard of Oz, and then also I saw the theatre version, but I don't remember it. I didn't remember anything before I actually went and watched this version. My perspective is of someone that doesn't really know the story that well. So I understand for people that obviously are die-hard fans that are not new to Wicked like I am, there might be elements or things that they saw or viewed in differently, or you know, there's elements of the story that they know what's going to happen next. Wicked is essentially the lives of the Good Witch and the Wicked Witch of the West, which is Elphaba. This is their story of them going to school, how they became who they are. At the start of the film, Wicked Witch of the West, Elphaba, has died and everyone is celebrating, but the kids are running super happy and excited that the witch is dead. Galinda starts singing, no one mourns the wicked. There is an acknowledgement of Elphaba being played by a black woman and how it can be an allegory for racism, for discrimination, period, especially in terms of being an outcast. I think that is what Wicked is about. Once we have Elphaba being played by Cynthia Erivo, right, even though she's green, we can't separate Cynthia from the role because we still are viewing it from the real world. So I think it can also be an allegory for dark-skinned black women and the specific discrimination that they face. Seeing the way that Elphaba's father treats her, really, it just made my blood boil. Like, it just reminds me of all that conversation and how children are mistreated, how if children go against the expectations from their parents, and in this context, it's seen as Elphaba's fault that her mum passed away at childbirth, and that because she's green, it's seen as she's wrong, she's almost like some sort of curse. We see, and I think later on I realised that it is Elphaba's mother who cheated with the wizard, and the wizard gave her some sort of concoction which made this magical child that we know as Elphaba. Bringing it back to the childhood element, you have the bullying because she's green, the constant mistreatment from her family, and her father doesn't see her. Her father doesn't try to understand her at all. She's just always in the wrong. We see back to the time zone where Elphaba is represented as this villain on the artwork in terms of the wood that is being burnt. Like, she is this entity of evilness that everyone is uniting against. Fast forward, Galinda is asked by one of the members of her town, or of Oz, right? Is it true you were friends? And she's like, yes, but it was a different time. So there's still, for me with Galinda, it really just makes me think of the way of allyship. It really made me think about how when the time gets tough, they're not there. And I also feel that several times throughout the film, those who are speaking out, whether it's the teacher who is the goat, and his name is Dr. Dillamond, wherever we're looking at animals, whether we're looking at Elphaba because she's green and is seen as everything wrong, right? They are seen as villains because they dare to challenge the order of things, the order, the hierarchy. How many things today does that mirror? You see the way that people are being disappeared, silenced, surveillanced for speaking, for challenging for just poking themselves out of that crowd. I saw this within the scene in terms of like that element of good and bad. I think obviously good and bad is a key theme throughout Wicked on a whole. But when we see Glinda arriving on campus and then we see Elphaba arriving on campus, the different reactions say it all. Elphaba don't even have to say anything. They're already thinking she's a villain from the moment that she steps foot there. Glinda, being this white woman who is blonde, who is skinny, who is seen as acceptable, who performs gender in a very specific acceptable way, right, is seen as so inherently good, not capable of anything wrong, despite the fact that she does so many people wrong throughout that entire film. If that isn't a representation of white womanhood, I don't know what is. Elphaba is having to explain. She's having to explain herself, saying, no, I'm not seasick. No, I do not eat grass as a child. Yes, I've always been green. Glinda don't have to explain anything. She just pops out and is adored, and people are at her defense immediately. We then have a scene in terms of Nella Rose, who is Elphaba's sister. Elphaba is there with her father to help Nella Rose settle in, right? The woman comes up to Nella Rose and has the audacity to say that she's tragically beautiful, which is ableist as heck, one. And two, she takes it upon herself to help when Nella Rose didn't want any help. Elphaba is very annoyed because she sees that dynamic, and then Elphaba becomes a threat because she has that power that she does not know how to control yet. It's like, Elphaba was not the problem, you were the problem in inserting yourself as some weird saviour because you're able-bodied when Nella Rose did not want you, and that compliment you gave her is not a compliment. It sounds extremely patronising and gross. So I felt like even that, you know, there's a different element of like who is outcasted, who is being treated, how do you explain it? Treated in a discriminatory way. She just wants to be a part of things, just like all of the her able-bodied classmates. She doesn't want to stand out with Elphaba because of that experience, that difficulty that she has faced as a disabled woman. Why can't, so it's like Elphaba's understanding you, but you're not understanding Elphaba, despite you both facing discrimination in different ways. And I feel like all the characters are complex in different ways in terms of why they act the way they do. I know people were saying that about Glinda, but I have to say, once I had a sort of racial lens of viewing things, it took time to see. I don't think I ever really saw it, to be honest. I'm trying to think. The way that she would pretend to be kind, pretend to be nice, but deep down, her behaviours were always self-serving and putting herself first. I just found that personally very frustrating. I feel like Elphaba's always sticking herself out there in a way that Glinda just never can. Like, Glinda just can't do what is the right thing if it is to her detriment. And on the conversation of colorism, there was a section where sort of like Elphaba talks to herself in that moment where the dad is constantly just being harsh on her, and she's like, she sort of says to herself, she says something like Nessa Rose being a perfectly acceptable colour. And again, that is colorism that is being spoken about there. Ooh, it's just a constant harshness, constant scolding. Elphaba wasn't even considered, it wasn't even an option for her to even go to the school in the beginning. And I think though this film is a fantasy, it is very much situated in the real world in terms of what we see, the dynamics, the interactions between people. And that is why, when it comes to white womanhood and Glinda, it was hilarious from the beginning when Madame Marble, if I'm pronouncing it wrong, I'm so sorry, or if I'm saying the wrong name, but Michelle Yeoh. Okay? It was just so funny when she was not interested in Glinda at all, because Glinda is used to just people just giving her everything through the fact that she's her because of her identity. But Elphaba is not used to being seen. She's not used to getting that support. She's not used to getting that encouragement. So at that stage of the film, watching it, I was like, oh, that's so nice for her to get that support. But obviously, we know that Madame Marble has her own interests in mind when it comes to the Wizard of Oz and why she's pretending to be on Elphaba's side. The film, it cracks me up because there is a bit in the script where Glinda goes, she says something like, something is very wrong, I didn't get my way. I was like, yeah, it must be, you're not used to that, are you? Her friends Bowen Yang and Bronwyn James, those are the actors' names, sort of pick her up and carry her away. That bit was funny, but then it's like, there's bits here I was just kind of like, you know, because of how it reflects the real world, I'm like, Glinda got on my nerves. There was bits where Glinda got on my nerves. I'm like, get it together, Glinda. And then you even have the fact of the room where, so she kind of like accidentally volunteers to have Elphaba share her room, but she didn't really want that. She just wanted to get Madame Marble on her side. She cares so much about people and how they view her, which I can understand if I'm trying to be balanced. That could be something that is not necessarily healthy, but she's definitely benefiting from it, so it's hard for me to even care. Yeah, and then meanwhile, she sways everyone's views against Elphaba, and they have this whole narrative around her in their head. Sounds very familiar, doesn't it? You have the ability to control how everyone perceives her. That's quite powerful, isn't it? Moving on, because I don't have a lot of time, discrimination against animals. And I think, once again, that is where we're seeing, like, what Wicked metaphorically is sort of, like, the themes that are coming through in terms of, like, discrimination, outsiders. And we have the teacher who is a goat, Dr. Dillamond, and there is a section where Glinda keeps on correcting his pronunciation of her name, and he says something along the lines of, goats don't have top front teeth, so that's why I'm not able to say your name the way that you would like me to. And Elphaba's like, maybe he's not like every other teacher, maybe he's different. And she's like, maybe the artichoke is steamed. So this is bullying, okay? So there is really like a political element in terms of the suppression of animal voices, the graffiti of animals should be seen and not heard. Animals are being disappeared, silenced. They're physically losing the ability to speak, which made me think maybe Madame Marble and the Wizard of Oz had done something, casted a spell around this. There's all this propaganda for people to fear animals, which is not true, but instead we see that everything that has been taught about the Wizard of Oz, about Oz to the children has been propaganda, and he is manipulating. I think in the lecture itself by the teacher, he talks about how this sort of fear of animals stems back to the drought, the great drought that nearly destroyed the Emerald City. So we see how the wizard rules by engineered consent, through deception, through propaganda, and it's very much giving fascism vibes, maintaining the interest of the state through controlling the thoughts and opinions of the masses. And we later on, further on in the film, we realise that both him and Madame Marble manipulated Elphaba into giving the monkeys wings so that they can become these sort of soldiers on their behalf, right? But we can also imagine that potentially that could be used to create fear around these sort of changes that animals are experiencing. We have this sort of overarching leader who wants people to see him as good, but doesn't have power, doesn't have the ability. But it's all a fabrication, and he only cares about maintaining power, and he will do that by any means. So it's very much giving me like political philosophy, Machiavelli. The ends justify the means. He's willing to do whatever as long as there's a good consequence for him, for the state, for those in power. I think it's very interesting because we can see how these institutions have PR and are investing in articles, in interviews, in whatever means that they can use in order to control perceptions or attempt. I'll make that clear. And when I'm talking about present day, outside of the film, attempt to control perception. So it makes me think about that. Jonathan Bailey, aka Prince Fiero. So we are first introduced to him when him and Elphaba bump into each other in the forest. Glinda wants to get to know him. She's preparing herself, makeup, outfits, perfume. Everyone is excited to see him. Again, you have this theme of like social acceptance, social rejection. What is seen as inherently good, what is seen as wrong. And him and Glinda immediately hit it off. Are you looking for something or someone? Our first fight. That was funny. That was funny. And I think when I think of comedy, I do think of Bowen Yang. And he's a comedian, so he's doing his thing. I really felt that. I don't see colour. There was a bit of a, at the beginning, I don't see colour. We know what is being said. Like, we bring our understandings to the film. Even though it's a fantasy, you can't separate where we are from where they are, if that makes sense. And oh, that did, I will say, I do like that comedy element, but I when I was writing this review quickly, I really thought to myself, hold on a minute, the best friend trope, who's funny, who's the emotional support, who are in the background and supporting what is often a white female protagonist. You know, it could be the sassy black woman, we see that form. We see the gay best friend. We see the fat best friend. Like, there's always this type of dynamic. And I do think that that role is that, essentially, because we don't get to learn anything about those characters. Linda encourages Buck, the Munchkin Man, to invite Nella Rose, Elphaba's sister, to go out with them, go out for a night on the town. And he is not interested in Nella Rose, he's interested in Glinda, but we get the sense that he's doing that to appeal to Glinda. But Glinda is into the prince, so he eventually realizes that, and I think in the film, Nella Rose eventually realizes that. And I think this is once again an example of something that Glinda does that is not cutesy. It's just damaging. And that kind of patronization, I think that is a constant element of the sort of ableism that Nella Rose's character faces in the film, right? Elphaba senses something is off. But she you know, obviously when you're sensing something's off, but you're like, okay, maybe they genuinely were actually trying to be nice at this point. So that's what she went with. And then you even see that Glinda set her up to be laughed at by giving her the sort of witch's hat, the black witch's hat. They all judged her and laughed at her when she arrives at the Ozdust ballroom. But this moment when Madame Marble comes to the Ozdust ballroom, this is before Elphaba arrives, and gives her the wand, you can tell she experiences that regret. She's like, damn, I've just set Elphaba up to be laughed at by everyone, and she has gone out of her way to demand that I get a place on the seminar, or she will walk away from the seminar completely, and a wand from Madame Marble, when all she's been doing is plotting of cruelty against her. That she's jealous of Elphaba because Elphaba was seen by Madame Marble in a way that Madame Marble is just not interested in Glinda. There's love triangles, which I'm not going to go into too deeply, between the prince, Elphaba, and Glinda. In the Ozdust ballroom scene, we have Elphaba, who embraces the mockery. The fact that people are laughing at her, and she's doing her interpretive dance, and she's just trying to sort of dance through the judgment. Glinda joins her, which is meant to be sort of like an act of, or like an apology to Elphaba. But Elphaba is always understanding. She's always willing to give people a chance. It's interesting because the makeover scene, we know, like, historically in films, the makeover scene is kind of like making the person more palatable, more socially acceptable. In this instance, we know that the makeover under Glinda's watch, right, it's just something that is temporary, but we just see it as kind of like, I kind of interpreted it as this sort of calm before the storm, because we know that in the final scene, for example, Elphaba, that is her true self. When she's on that broom and she's singing Defying Gravity, that is her true self. She's willing to lose everything, right, in order to do the right thing. Glinda stays where she's safe, where she can control where she's viewed, for example. I think maybe you could argue that, right? But I did think that she became a bit more likable towards, you know, once she's on a similar page as Elphaba. And I think overall I really enjoyed this film, because this was my first time I was like, to the Wicked stands, I get it now, I get it. Like, I really want to read more about Wicked, and for me it's really about what Elphaba represents, period, but especially in this version. I definitely think that this film is not perfect in every area, but the message, for me, it's the message in terms of just Wicked as a musical. I really want to see Wicked in theatre now. But I think those are my main thoughts on Wicked. And I think it's very interesting how the British press completely ignored Cynthia Erivo. It just directly correlates with what the film's about. So, not much shock there. And you know, if you've seen Wicked, please let me know what you think of the film below. Open to any perspectives, even if you didn't agree with me. I know I was very hard on Glinda, but how can I not be? She represents certain energy that I can't stand. Bye. Bye.